Yes, Harsh.
Hello. Yeah. First of all, welcome everyone to the Unfolders Initiative. This is the third session of our initiative, and today we are gonna touch different topics with respect to interpersonal relations with Mr. VP Raja sir himself. Sir would be unfolding various deep topics, and I would like to first of all welcome sir by saluting him because for the service he has given to the nation, and even after retirement, sir is actually serving the nation right now through the works of PCGT, and the works of PCGT are incredible. So, sir, welcome you. My name is Harsha. I'm the co-editor and the co-host for this initiative and this meeting. And before we start, I would like to tell all of you to keep your mic and video off to adhere to the code of conduct. And at the end, we'll be taking some rapid Q&A. So, for that, if you have any doubt, you can send me the question in the chat box right itself. And yes, that is what I wanted to say. So first of all, welcome to the Unfolders Initiative. And today, the co-host is my co-editor for this initiative, Mr. Harsh Sharma. We'll start in a moment.
Thank you.
Good afternoon, sir. Am I audible? Hello?
Yes, Harsh.
Right. So first of all, sir, thank you for giving us this opportunity. I'm really grateful that you are here with us right now for this session. And with that being said, I would like to begin this session. And so we all know that you have a background in STEM. You had a master's in physics, and you later on went to economics, and then become a Indian Administrative Service Officer. So we would like to know about your transition from being a STEM student to an IAS officer, and what was your journey like?
Oh, it has been an exciting journey, so to say. I mean, well, I followed what you can say my inner voice and passions as it took me. So it was not something which was done in a very, very conscious fashion. I just went on doing where my mind took me, so to say. But if I were to look back and try to invent a reason for it, so to say, yes, I was passionate about physics and mathematics. And that is my real passion when I was in college, or both in undergraduate and early postgraduate. Let's say in the age of 16 to about 22. Certainly, what took most of my time and what was most passionate for me was physics and mathematics. Physics and mathematics are related to physics, a kind of mathematical physics. Of course, I belong to a generation. I was born in the year 1948, after India had become independent. So I basically came into this world at a time when India's development was upmost in the minds of a lot of people. So that also had an influence in the sense when I went to college from 1964 to 69 at Delhi, in a fairly prestigious college called the St. Stephen's College. A lot of discussions used to be about India's developmental path. You can say that we were all, in a certain sense, Nehruvians, highly impressed by the leadership and the so-called dynamism exhibited by India's first Prime Minister, Jawaharlal Nehru. So even though I went abroad for further studies in my subject of physics, there was no thinking in my mind in those days. I'm talking of early 70s, late 60s and early 70s of, immigrating or settling down in the United States. The idea was to get good degrees, get an international education, and see how you can contribute to India's development. An opportunity for me came when top Indian kind of businessmen and entrepreneurs often used to come to the US universities looking for young boys and girls who are keen to come back to India and help them set up what today we call as startups. The word startup didn't exist in those days. The name startup didn't exist. So a gentleman called Mr. Vinay Bharatram, who is the son of a top industrialist of the country at that time from Delhi, called the Bharatram and Charatram group. They run a lot of industries, the most important being textiles, called the Delhi cloth mills. So Bharatram was the head of that, and his brother Charatram had industries on chemicals, fertilizers, etc. Now Bharatram's son Vinay Bharatram had come for such a visit to Columbia University in New York, where I was, and he was keen, and he used to meet kind of Indian graduate students, etc., informally over a cup of tea. So he told us that he's going to set up a new unit called DCM Data Products. DCM stands for Delhi Cloth Mills, but Data Products was electronic setup. And I was quite impressed by his sales talk and articulation. I agreed to come and join in this new setup. So I came to India. At that time, in fact, I was doing an internship with IBM Yorktown Heights, the well-known IBM, and I was doing a kind of a summer internship with them when this dialogue took place. So I came and joined a very small team of half a dozen of us to help Vinay Bharatram set up this new unit called DCM Data Products. The first product which DCM Data Products brought into the market was a machine called Moscal 1400. Moscal standing for metal oxide semiconductor calculator. 1400 because it had 14 digits which could be digitally displayed. So we kind of assembled this machine. Since we were a small team of 6-7 people, all of us knew everything. We knew from the vendors from whom we were getting the things. We knew our prospective market, whom to approach. Mr. Vinay Bharatram had only kind of taken one senior production man from Indian telephone industries, Bangalore, for basically doing the assembly work. So when I was in DCM Data Products, some new things I learned, and amongst the new things were things like finance and pricing, and how pricing decisions are taken, etc., etc. So to cut a long story short, this Moscal 1400, the first model which we produced, all costs put together, including the cost of overheads, the marketing overhead costs, administrative costs, was costing us about a little less than 1,500 rupees a piece. But we were, without any difficulty, we were selling it in the market for about 8,500 rupees. That was the kind of markup involved in this. Now, at my age and at that time, I'm talking of 1970s, 71, 1971. I am 22, 23 years of age. I found it, why so much of a markup? What is really happening to all these profits? See, during my student days, when I was not busy with physics or maths, I must confess my leisure time reading used to be a lot of reading of Marxian literature or left of center literature. So in those days, I was certainly influenced by the writings of Karl Marx, by what had happened in the Russian Revolution. So I can broadly say at that age, I was very much left of center in my political ideological beliefs, which was still to develop fully. So it was these kinds of mindsets which made me compete for the IAS exam. Let's say I had a little conscience problem with what I thought at that time was a kind of ultra profiteering which was being indulged in by the new startup. So I'm trying to recall my mind, and that is what made me decide to write for the civil service exams. And I got into the IAS. I hope some kind of a clear explanation.
Yes, sir, definitely. So, in one of your previous talks, you mentioned a few ways of distinguishing between daily propositions of life. So could you describe those categories, and could you elaborate on them as well?
Yes, the point which I have a way of looking at it. You see, from the time we get up till the time we sleep, we are bombarded with a lot of information. We talk to members of the family, we talk to our friends, we read newspapers. These days we look into our iPads and phones. We watch TV. So we are bombarded with a lot of information. I have found a convenient method of putting this into three categories, perhaps because of my background, but I found it useful. In the first category, I'll put the propositions of mathematics, things like 2 plus 2 is equal to 4, or a plus b the whole squared is a squared plus 2ab plus b squared, or sine squared theta plus cos squared theta is equal to 1, or any proposition in calculus, geometry, algebra. I'll call these as propositions of mathematics. The beauty about the propositions of mathematics are they are tautologically true. From the left-hand side, you can go to the right-hand side through a series of steps. But in a certain sense, the right-hand side is just a different way of writing the left-hand side. That's what I mean by being tautologically true. The reason they are tautologically true is mathematics basically uses a logic called deductive logic. The simplest example of a deductive logic is a syllogism. All men are mortal. Socrates is a man. Therefore, Socrates is mortal. If the major premise is true and the minor premise is true, the conclusion must be true. And that's the kind of logic that is followed in maths, leading to certainty in maths and leading to this fact that they are tautologically true. In the second category, I will put all propositions of the natural sciences and all the applied sciences based on these natural sciences. The primary natural sciences are physics, chemistry, and biology, and applied sciences on that is almost the entire field of engineering and medicine, which is applied biology in a certain sense. So But this is the area, what I just now described, the natural sciences, the engineering subjects based on that, and medicine, biology and medicine. These are the areas where maximum growth in human knowledge has really occurred in the last 300, 400 years. But how did this great advancement take place? It took place because, like maths, these also use deductive logic, but over and above deductive logic, it uses another method of thinking called inductive logic. I see one crow that is black, a second crow that is black. By the time I have seen 50 crows which are black, I see a pattern and jump to the conclusion that all crows are black. That is, I do a finite number of observations in an experiment, and the moment I see a pattern, I generalize from that pattern. And it is this ability to generalize based on a finite number of observations, the moment I can see a pattern, which has been the method used, because of which such massive advancement in knowledge has taken place, which is good, which is very good. But we should never forget that because of this, the natural sciences do not have the kind of certainty which mathematics has. There is a certain amount of uncertainty, or the moment I see a crow which is not black, I should be able to change my theory. Let me give a specific example to make this clear. All of us know that light travels in a straight line, something which we learn in school. Engineering students and physics students know, well, that's not completely true. Light travels as waves, and sometimes it travels as photons, as particles. There's a wave-particle duality. In spite of all these advances, we can still use the proposition that light travels in a straight line because it works as long as we are dealing with distances which are much, much greater than the wavelength of light. But the moment we start dealing with distances comparable to the wavelength of light, we get into difficulties. That is, then we realize that light does not really travel as a straight line. So we have to modify that proposition that light travels in a straight line by saying that light travels as a straight line is a useful proposition as long as we are dealing with distances which are much, much greater than the wavelength of light. Now, these things are not matters of interest only to physicists. It has today become matters of interest even in the commercial world. For example, thanks to the internet and thanks to today's technology, all data, information, everything is traveling through the electromagnetic spectrum, so traveling at the speed of light. So, for example, in the National Stock Exchange, some heads had to roll and some investigations took place because some brokers were able to get information literally a millisecond before a terminal situated near the stock exchange gets information a millisecond or a few nanoseconds before a terminal situated in Andheri or Borivali. That means people whose trading is done on softwares, the person who gets the information, the software gets implemented. And this can mean profits of crores of rupees. I will not go into the point is, a stockbroker, most of them are not physicists, but today it affects trading. One needs to find corrective measures to ensure that a level playing field is really provided. So this is the second category. That is, in the natural sciences and in the engineering subjects, we have a tentative proposition, but we must keep on searching for the limits of validity of that. And the moment we strike a limit of validity, the previous proposition is not thrown out. It becomes a subset of the new proposition, which is valid under a given set of circumstances. In the third category, I will put everything else. I will put, all the social sciences, including economics, sociology, all these debates that continuously seem to divide human beings. What is left liberal and what is, rightist philosophy. All these things are in the third category. And if you think deeply about it, there's nothing right, there is nothing wrong. As Shakespeare said, there's nothing right or wrong in these. It's basically thinking. Except when the majority of people are persuaded to think in a particular fashion, that becomes mainstream. Because it has become mainstream, doesn't make it any more right or any more wrong. So this is what I mean by the three categories. And these are important because most conflicts in human civilization take place because of differences of opinion in the third category. There are no differences of opinion as such in the natural sciences or in mathematics. There may be unsolved problems, and the way to solve that problem, there may be various theories, but there isn't a difference of opinion which can become emotive. While in the third category, since it's all based on perceptions, and nothing is true and nothing is false, a lot of dogmas can develop, and dogmas can create a lot of problems. I hope I was able to convey what's in my mind.
Yes, sir, very clearly. So, sir, talking on the third category you mentioned, it's the gray area where nothing is right, nothing is wrong. So, what kind of role does it play for a person studying STEM and with a STEM background? And is it important for us to indulge into gaining knowledge or gaining ideas, insights from those study fields?
No, STEM is good to study, but it's necessary but not sufficient. The human mind has two parts, a right side and a left side. Study of mathematics, study of all the STEM subjects, science, technology, engineering, mathematics, all this certainly improves the analytic capabilities of the left side of the brain. But all these skills that you acquire and the analytic capabilities that you acquire can be used for the good of mankind. It can also be abused, sometimes knowingly, sometimes unknowingly. So, STEM has to be studied, particularly in the coming 20, 30 years. Most jobs will also come for students who have the STEM skills. That is why it's very, very necessary, but not sufficient because it can be used or abused, often without your knowledge. And this is true of all analytics or all kinds of skills. After all, I can quite imagine that during Nazi Germany, scientists and engineers created gas chambers which could kill double the number of humans with using half the amount of gas. That's certainly a technologically great thing to do. But to celebrate that means there is some lack of, it's a pure STEM kind of, I was given a job, I've done it. Even in the development of the atomic bomb, there was a world famous scientist called Oppenheimer, who also participated The American government, when the Second World War was going, had this big project called the Manhattan Project. The objective of the project was to develop an atomic weapon, because the first reactor, the neutron, had been found in around 1930 by Chadwick. And so the possibility of producing something was there. And the Manhattan Project was financed by the US government. There was one top scientist called Oppenheimer. And the first kind of experimental test happened, and he saw the power of this. And then he quit, saying that, no, I have a conscience problem to be part of this project. Of course, he was more or less kept under house arrest by the US government. The bomb did come. Hiroshima and Nagasaki did take place. Not every scientist dropped out of the project. Now, you can see by just going into the internet, you can read the biographies of Oppenheimer. Now, the Oppenheimer is the kind of person who will say was very good in the STEM subjects, but the right side of his mind was also developed very well. Now, that doesn't mean that the others who participated did it knowingly. They didn't even think about it. Take the 2008 financial crisis that took place in the world. It was all done by the so-called fintech wizards, young people in the early 20s who had done very well from either the Ivy League universities of the US or the best universities of the world, or the IIMs like IIM Ahmedabad, got very fat salaries, But what were these finance companies doing? They were basically, let's say, borrowing money at 2% or 3%. They were borrowing money at 3% and lending it at 2%, which is not sustainable. But the MIS was so, the set of people whose job is to borrow money, the more you borrow, the more will be your variable pay. The people who are lending, the more you lend, the more will be your variable pay. So the incentive system functions in a fashion where everybody is happy. But that's how this great financial crisis, unlike the Great Depression of 1929, the 2008 financial crisis was a crisis, man-made crisis, created by the best brains of the world who are very good in their own subject. I always warn when I lecture students and all, that the next big crisis will come from this abuse of knowledge and skills by people who are very good in IT and machine learning and artificial intelligence. So all these skills are good. They're very essential, but not sufficient, because every skill can be used and abused. Every day on your phones, you'll be getting these messages. Be careful of such and such phishing activity. Even today, about an hour ago, I got a message. Please don't, be careful, be alerted, not to send good morning or good night messages, or forward them, particularly in a figure or a diagram or a photo, because these are being used by a number of cyber crooks who put in codes within these things. So if you want to say good morning, please type it out. Don't forward any of this. We also saw all those messages of cyber warriors who may break into various things after our tension with China. Now, these are all instances, but do we have sufficient Oppenheimers today in the system, or much less? So that is why STEM is, I'll still, if I were to be born again, I will still study STEM subjects but one must study liberal arts also later. It's true that STEM is difficult to study the older you become. So I will still recommend at a younger age, you study the STEM subjects, but don't take the position that your education is over, because even without your knowledge, you'll get used by your own bosses or organizations. Using your skill, they'll be doing great damage to society. I hope I conveyed.
Yes, sir, very clearly. I think STEM is a lot of our students here are students of engineering and studying liberal arts and subjects of it. Like may move us in a way where we transition from having knowledge to wisdom. I think that is the ultimate insight for me. So for today, our primary topic was
Actually, before you let me intervene. Now that you talked about this knowledge and wisdom, you got the correct words. STEM gives you a lot of knowledge, useful knowledge. But wisdom is, I will not give a lecture on that, but I'm reminded of a particular episode. I'll just give reference to that episode, and you can do a Google search and get it. This is in the so-called Chandogya Upanishad. Chandogya Upanishad. There is a gentleman called Swataketu, a very brilliant boy, who, as per the system of education prevalent in those ancient days, goes to a Gurukul at a very young age and continues there for about 20 years and becomes first class first in every subject that he studies. And at the age of 24, he comes back home after finishing all his education. His father's name is Uddalaka Aruni. Swataketu is the son's name. So the father notices, literally within the first 2 days, the son he seems to become so arrogant, so he's so confident that he knows everything in the world. So after 2 nights, Uddalaka Aruni tells his son, I'm feeling a little tired, so I'm going to sleep early today. Do me a favor, get me a glass of water and just keep it near my bed. The son dutifully does that. Then he says, just do me a little more favor, a very small, about 1/4 chamach of salt. Can you just put it in that water and stir it? Son does that. Next morning, when the father is still not got up, the son comes into the room. Then the father gets up. Then the son tells the father, Papa, you wanted me to keep water and I've kept it accordingly, but you have not touched it. And the father says, but I wanted you to put a little salt in it. The son says, I did put it. The father says, where is it? I don't see the salt. He says, taste it, then you'll see it. From there, the Chandogya Upanishad, this Chandogya section 6, describes the conversation between Uddalaka Aruni and Swataketu, which is called Brahma Vidya, which is imparting wisdom to his son. He tells him, I did all this because you're full of knowledge, but now you have to learn something else, which he calls as Brahma Vidya. So there are a lot of things, but knowledge will be used for the good of yourself as well as for the good of society only if it is tempered with wisdom, not otherwise. Otherwise, you will use it, and 90 out of 100 cases, you won't even know that somebody has used you to get an evil done. Yes, Harsh.
Yes, the story seemed quite insightful for our viewers, I guess. But now I would like to move on to the primary topic of this session, which is in improving and developing interpersonal relations. And so I would like you to explain about transactional analysis and what exactly it is and how do we use it in real life.
Before I come to transactional analysis, of course, the majority of you listening to me, I presume, are in your late teens or early 20s. Many may not have joined organizations yet, while some may have worked in organizations. But sooner or later, you'll be joining organizations. You'll get jobs depending on the skill sets that you have learned. But having got into an organization, sooner or later you will realize that you don't face any problem because of somewhere you're a little weak. Your problems mostly arise out of not getting along with the boss, not getting along with your team leader, or some colleague who seems to be obnoxious, these kinds of issues. And in my long service of over 45 years, I met a large number of people, guided a large number of groups and teams, some very small teams and very big teams. And I've always asked myself this question: what are the kind of skills which each one of us need to continuously acquire? And I tried to summarize it in my mind as 4 skills. One is what I'll call as the subject matter skill. That is whatever you have studied. I mean, many of you may be electrical engineers or experts in coding or mechanical engineers, IT professionals. Some may be lawyers, some may be accountants or finance whiz kids. These are all subject matter. That also keeps changing. So you need to be updated on that continuously. But over and above subject matter skill, you need to learn what I will call as interpersonal skills. The ability to get along with human beings who are different from you. Over and above human relation skill, you need to slowly learn a skill called conceptual skills. That is basically the ability to look at a problem from a variety of points of view. I'm having a certain view, but I should be able to put myself in the shoes of others and see their point of view also. Let's say in a labor management discussion, I'm on the side of management, but I should also understand the labor's point of view, not simply by listening to them, by putting myself in their shoes and asking the question, why do they feel the way they feel? If I want to solve the Kashmir problem, I should not only know how various groups in India feel about it, I should also know what the Kashmiris feel about it, or different sections of Kashmir feels about it. This is conceptual skill. And practical skills, obviously. Practical skills like use of the computer, new skills may come. So out of these 4 skills, the subject matter skill and the practical skills are the easiest to acquire. For example, I know in the United States, unless you are in one of the old cities like New York or Boston or San Francisco, you can't even survive without a car. So driving is an essential practical skill even for survival in a country like US, in all the new towns or areas other than the very old towns which have a good rapid transit system. So to repeat, subject matter skill and practical skills, easiest to acquire. But problems come mostly because of interpersonal skills. Conceptual skills are required the higher you grow up in an organization. If you're a manager at a high level or become a director of a company become a minister or secretary to government, the higher you move up in an organization, there is a lot of need for conceptual skill. But at the lower levels of the hierarchy, conceptual skill doesn't play much of a part because you're not involved with those kinds of decisions. But interpersonal skills are required at all levels unless you're a loner doing some research on your own. But today, there is hardly any work which is done by only an individual. Even the smallest team will have 3-4 people. Even something being developed, a new code is being written, or there is in the IT sector something new being developed. There will be minimum 4 or 5 people or 3-4 people doing that. That's the smallest group. So the moment you work in a team, interpersonal skills are very important. In fact, we are right now on this online webinar. Otherwise, if I'm on a kind of face-to-face class, what I normally ask students is, I ask them the question, who is the youngest amongst you? There will be somebody who is 17 or 18 years of age or 20 years of age. I ask that person, okay, you get up and tell me, till now in your life, have you got along with each and every human being that you came in touch with? The answer will be an honest no. And that is the human experience. Everybody attending this webinar can ask this question in their own mind, and everybody's universal answer will be, I get along with some people, do not get along with some people. But you need to ask the question, how come that I get along with some people and don't get along with certain others? And it is this which this subject of transactional analysis really deals with. This entire subject of transactional analysis is actually based on lifelong studies of a psychologist who spent his entire life studying psychology in depth, a gentleman called Sigmund Freud, an Austrian gentleman. He spent his entire life. He has written very widely, and his books are available. You can again get them online. I mean, you don't have to purchase them. They'll all be, PDF files will be available of all these books. But his books are difficult. So only students of MA psychology or people doing PhD in psychology or psychiatrists, only such people study that. Others who are not directly dealing with psychology very rarely read Sigmund Freud. At best, they would have heard about him as a matter of general knowledge. But it's difficult reading. Now, one psychiatrist, his name is Dr. Eric Berne, using the ideas of Sigmund Freud, made a simpler model which is easier for people to understand. And so it is this Dr. Eric Berne who developed the subject which is now referred to as transactional analysis. In the model developed by him, a human being basically has 3 ego states. Or to imagine in your mind, imagine a traffic signal on the road. You have this red, amber, green. That's a traffic signal. So like the red, amber, green, every human mind has 3 ego states. You can call them as the parent ego state, the adult ego state, and the child ego state. Or think of them as 3 tape recorders: the adult tape recorder, the parent tape recorder, the adult tape recorder, and the child tape recorder. All these tape recorders get switched on even when you are in your mother's womb, the moment you're conceived. And even now, as all of you are listening to me, all these 3 tape recorders are on. Now, they have a characteristic. The parent tape recorder records the taught concepts of life. what you learn from your parents through instruction, the do's and don'ts, the value system, which depends on the family in which you grow, what your school teachers and college professors teach you. All this go into the parent ego state or the parent tape recorder. The adult tape recorder records the thought concepts of life. That is, what you've taken in information, thought about it, mulled it, reflected on it, and then come to some tentative conclusions. Those are recorded in the adult tape recorder. And the child tape recorder records your feelings, sadness, happiness, jealousy, anger, all these feelings get recorded. That's a simple model. So when two human beings interact, the first thing that comes from this model is it is actually three ego states interacting with three other ego states. It's something like P1, A1, C1 interacting with P2, A2, C2. So even a person-to-person interaction now becomes, as I said, P1, A1, C1 interacting with P2, A2, C2. So you're all mathematical students, so you can work out the possible number of permutations. You can have P1 interacting with P2, P1 with A2, P1 with C2, similarly P2 with P1, P2 like that. You work out the permutations. So even a very simple one-on-one interaction involves a large number of possibilities. But before we come to that, the question which we raised as to how come that my experience is that I get along with some people, I don't get along with somebody else. A sub-question which you need to answer is, why are people different? We all instinctively know that people are different. People are different under the transactional analysis model. People are different, number one, because the PAC contents are different. What is recorded in each of these tape recorders, P1, A1, C1 of gentleman or lady 1, is different from person to person. The contents are different. A second reason is the PAC compositions can be different. What I mean by composition is, even though all the three tape recorders exist, all the three ego states exist, we get into the habit of utilizing one ego state more often. It's something like those parts, those muscles of the human body which you exercise become stronger, while those muscles which you hardly use get somewhat atrophied. And that is why this general advice that you must do your exercises every day, because some muscles otherwise don't get used at all. And now with COVID, a lot of advice is floating around on how to keep your respiratory system in order and the importance of pranayama or something. These are all exercises. In the same fashion, those parts of the ego states which you use get strengthened. Those who you don't use that much, relatively speaking, gets a little atrophied. So suppose from a very young age, you have got into the habit of whenever you face a kind of a decision situation, should I do this, should I do that? Unconsciously you ask in your mind, what will my father have done? What will my mother have done? Or try to remember a similar incident and the advice that you got from your parents. People who get into that kind of a habit, the parent ego state will become stronger as compared to A and C. Similarly, some professions, if you join the armed forces at a young age, you become an NDA cadet, then you're trained that you have to obey commands. So even when you become an officer, literally as a part of a drill, you never disagree with your boss. Even if you have to disagree, the style in the armed forces is yes, sir, you're right, sir. But if you permit me, sir, I like to say something. And if you get permission, you try to give your point of view. After that, if you're overruled, no further arguments. So there are certain professions, auditor's profession, or professions of the armed forces or the police, where your training is such that you're groomed, where your parent ego state becomes stronger. A scientist, if he or she is a very good scientist, is likely to have an adult ego state which is stronger as compared to PNC. The most creative people of the world, poets, playwrights, people who kind of direct cinemas, music composers, all these people have a very strong child ego state. Because literally the raw material of the work is all feelings. So some of the most creative people in the world have a very strong child ego state. So this is what I mean by saying that in addition to the PAC contents being different, the PAC compositions can also be different. And there's a third reason, which is that each human being has a default position of looking at other human beings. When we are born into this world, physically born into this world from our mother's womb, the default position is, I'm not okay, you're okay. A small baby or a small child knows instinctively that it can't do, if it needs anything, it needs to cry. I'm hungry, I have to cry. I'm wet, I have to cry. Because I'm not okay, you're okay. You need the help of the mother. So all human beings at birth are born with the life position, I'm not okay, you're okay. About 20, this only I'm putting a figure out of my hat, based on my readings, about 20% of the human beings continue in this default position for their entire life. I'm not okay, you're okay. By the way, when I talk of life positions, I'll come to the other life positions. Everybody gets into various life positions, but when I say default life position, the life position in which you predominantly exist. Most of the time you're in that. So as I said, all of us are born with the life position, I'm not okay, you're okay. And about 20% of the human beings born in this world continue with that same life position till their death. I'm not okay, you're okay. But these people can do well in life. They can do well in whatever is the calling or profession. But they normally require a walking stick. If they join an organization, they can rise up to become number 2. But they always require somebody's walking stick, so to say. They'll find it very, very uncomfortable to be number 1. They may be able to take 90% of the decisions, but they always require somebody's support to take the remaining 10%. Because I'm not okay, you're okay. So even though 20% of the human beings continue in this life position, there are some who change from this life position to something else. And this change normally comes about because of some event happening in life. Event which creates a kind of a shock, is somewhat traumatic. It can be death of somebody very close to you. It can be getting jilted in love. It can be a variety of things, but it is traumatic. And when you come out of the traumatic situation, which could take time, you change your life position to, I'm okay, you're not okay. And easily about 70% of the human beings change into this life position. So at any given point of time, about 70 to 75% of the human beings are in the life position, I'm okay, you are not okay. In an organization, it is exhibited in the form, may not be expressed, but you're not responsible for anything, because in your mind you say, if only I had good subordinates, I had excellent colleagues, and I had a super boss, then what else, what all I could have achieved. Today, if things are not gone well, it is not because of me. It is because of either a bad boss, or colleagues who did not cooperate, or the stupid subordinates. That's what is occurring in your mind all the time. In a certain sense, you sleep well because you're not responsible for anything. You don't feel a sense of responsibility. Kya karna hai? But you're not dejected. You do what in Marathi is called sankam. I will do what I'm told. Otherwise, just muddle through life without realizing that you're muddling through. You're quite happy. A third, the same kind of traumatic event can lead a very small percentage of people to get into a life position, I'm not okay, you're not okay. That's a dangerous life position. That's the kind of life position, everybody can get into it for a very short while. But if people get into it for a very long time, everybody may not notice. But the human beings with whom they're in daily touch, like members of the family, if they go to work, their immediate colleagues in the office who meet him or her every day, the immediate boss whom the person has to meet every day, these people will know that kuch theek nahi hai. Such people need to be given professional help. That is, they need to be helped to meet a professional psychologist or a professional psychiatrist to somehow wean them out of that life position. While ignoring it can be dangerous, because these are the people who, if ignored, and people hope that sab apne aap theek ho jayega, could end up with suicides. So that's dangerous. The fourth life position, which is what will improve interpersonal relationships most, is the life position, I'm okay, you're okay. The first you're born with. From 1, you move into 2 or 3 because of some traumatic event. 4, you don't automatically acquire. You have to reflect. It comes only by conscious effort. Where I'm okay, you're okay. Where you respect all human beings. Easy to say, difficult to acquire. But even when you're aware of these, it can do a lot of improvement in interpersonal relationship. Some short kind of what you can call as, what do you call these? In Hindi, they are called kunjis, na? That is for the exam, when you study notes, so-called quick study notes before exam. That kind of tip. How can I improve my interpersonal relationship? First advice is, spend some time alone. Ask yourself, what are the kind of thoughts that exist in my parent ego state? Because these thoughts would have put in under various circumstances and times, which had a meaning at a particular time. But with passage of time, they would have become dysfunctional. Let me give a specific example to say how certain thoughts in the parent ego state can become dysfunctional much later in life. Suppose you are somebody, suppose you are a 7 or 8-year-old boy or girl growing up in Srinagar today or anywhere in the Kashmir Valley. Your experience is going to be, even before the lockdown, there's been lockdown there. The moment you peep out of your window or open the door, you only see troops, helmeted and with AK-47 rifles, heavily armed troops. And since you're only 7-year-old, the mother will come running behind you and close the window and say, come, come, come. And then perhaps explain to the child, don't look there. For all you know, she may also tell the child, they're not good people, they're carrying guns. You see, these are the kind of things which get, why go that far? Take COVID now. Our own behavior in the last 3 months has certainly changed. Every human beings, in a funny way, is thought of as a potential carrier. He or she may be positive. So you take various precautions. So in the same fashion, the circumstances, self-preservation and survival is a basic instinct. Now coming back to the Kashmir example, this boy or girl, let's say after 10 years, situations improve. But this thing that will remain in the parent ego state. So many of the biases against religion, against caste. You saw what happened in the United States 2 weeks ago. The kind of, all of you know that yes, there was a trade in black slaves which existed for centuries. Then slavery was abolished, right, starting from Abraham Lincoln's time. The last state, the state of Alabama in the United States, finally abolished so-called mixed busing. That is, till the year 1964, in the southern state of Alabama in the United States, white children and black children couldn't travel in the same school bus. So that is the last state which abolished so-called this racial busing which used to take place, 1964. But things improved. There was differences you could see. But a few weeks ago, you could see how, if you scratch the skin, how these divisions come out. The fault lines in society come out. This also happens because of memories created. I don't know how many of you have read this beautiful story which we used to read when we were in school called Uncle Tom's Cabin. Otherwise, just note down Uncle Tom's Cabin. Do a Google search, you'll get the book. It's about a very obedient black person who was a slave, who was working in a rich landlord's house and his life. So, coming back to transactional analysis, like that each one of us have some messages in the parent ego state, which perhaps had a purpose when it was put in, a reason we would have forgotten, or sometimes we may know. But if you think about it, it has become dysfunctional today. When I say if you think about it, what I'm trying to say is put the contents of your parent ego state in a witness box and question it with your own adult ego state. That won't rub off the entire message, but it will rub off sufficient part of the message that what has become dysfunctional has become a prejudice. That prejudice will come down to some extent, and that will help a lot in improving interpersonal relationship. A second advice that I give, again, easier said, difficult to practice, but worth practicing, is never be judgmental about human beings. It's not necessary for every human being to follow everything that you believe, need not have the same belief system that you have. And there is no reason to hold that against him or her. Somewhere in your mind, keep this. Let me try not to become judgmental. And the less you become judgmental, automatically, the more you will develop the life position. I'm okay, you're okay. I hope, Harsh, I conveyed something.
Yes, so certainly you covered more than I asked for in the entire thing. So I think it gave everyone a very in-depth idea of what transactional analysis is. And the key takeaways from this was to first of all be aware of your own ego states, and then don't be judgmental and empathize towards people so that it makes your conversations better and your understanding better. So a common occurrence in transactions of daily lives is conflicts between people. So how should one go about resolving them, or how to deal with such tensed situations in our lives based on transactional analysis?
See, 10 situations will occur. The first thing to by the way, sometime today evening or night, I will send Harsh the names of some books, which he can then pass on to participants whose emails he has. And all these books are available again, open in freely downloadable form on the internet, which will help you to study some of this better. Now, coming to your question, tense moments. The first thing to realize is, out of these three ego states, PAC, what gets hurt is the child ego state, because the feelings reside there. So, which means transactions P1C2, A1C2 are 90% cause hurt. Not always. There are exceptions to this. A transaction of a mother with a small child can often be P1C1, P1C2. But that's a nursing transaction. It doesn't hurt. Romantic transactions can also be P1C1 or A1C1, A1C2 or C1C2. They don't hurt. So there are exceptions. But by and large, transactions can hurt the person who hears. It is the child which causes hurt. So when a conversation or a situation arises, the first thing is, the moment you realize unknowingly I have kind of hurt the child ego state of the other person, The moment you're aware of it, keep your mouth shut. Let not the conversation proceed. Of course, if you have a very good vocabulary, that is where the language skills come, then you can convert the tense situation to a joke. I don't know how many of you have heard the speech of Shashi Tharoor in the so-called Oxford Union debate, where everybody listening are British students, by and large British. But he condemns the British with laughter. Because of a right rapporteur. By saying, for example, they looted India and also created a new word called loot and put it in their own dictionary. Creating laughter. You're telling something very harsh. But there's no possibility of anger because of the use of language. But not all human beings can develop. But for students who are in front of me, language skills are always very important. In any language, whatever, maybe your mother tongue, maybe Hindi, but a language in which you have very good vocabulary, you can handle tense moments with jokes. Ulo Deshpande would have handled it in that fashion. But ordinary mortals who have limited language abilities, my advice is understand that a child ego state of somebody is hurt. Just keep mum. If possible, change the topic of the conversation. This thing which has been broken can recommence after a day or two. While if you insist on continuing with the conversation, it will have a cascading negative effect and people will accumulate what are called as anger steps, which is not good. As I said, I'll recommend some books where you'll find more interesting examples on how to deal with it.
Yes, sir, I'll share this with the audience after this session directly. But now I would like to call upon my co-host Harsha to ask the further questions and continue this session.
Hello.
Yeah.
Hi, sir. So, my question is that what does ethics and values play a role in anyone's life?
Well, ethics and values plays a lot of role. The only thing is, these things are to be experienced. There is a debate. Of course, many schools used to have something called moral education, right? What is the impact of all that? I don't want to get into. But the simple answer to your question is, ethics is everything, in fact. That is, if you don't have ethics, you are a little below what can be called as a member of the human race. Now, but what is ethics? Ethics means, ethics deals with two things. One is right and wrong. What is right and what is wrong? And on many occasions, you need a simple rule which can help you to tell you what is right and what is wrong. That's one question. The second question is, even after adopting a rule, you know that you have two options, A and B, and A is the right thing to do in this situation. You may go and end up doing B. These often referred to as the philosopher's stone in ethics. All of you would have heard that story of a king who wanted to test the honesty of his subjects. Small kingdom, so he had an empty tank behind his palace, completely empty. So he issued a farman that on an Amavasya night, every subject should come and pour a glass of milk in that empty tank. Next morning, when the king got up, he found it was full of water. Because everybody thought, since others will be pouring milk, if I pour water, it will go unnoticed. This is the problem with ethics. Everybody wants ethics for others, but not for me. There's another quote in Marathi. I don't remember the full Marathi on this. A cat often feels that if it closes its eyes and drinks the milk, nobody is watching it. Again, problem of ethics. So ethics is interesting as a discipline, but you will face dilemmas in life, both in your personal life and in your professional life. Dilemmas means, should I do this? I should not do this. But this much I can tell you, the decisions you take in each of your ethical dilemmas will finally determine the direction in which you proceed, in which you grow. I think, you see, again, to summarize, there's all these theories of ethics can broadly be once again put into three categories. One category are called the ontological theories of ethics, which basically tries to say, what is my duty? That is, I'm faced with a problem. You ask yourself, what is my duty? The best example of that is the crisis of Arjuna in the Bhagavad Gita. He's in war with his brothers and cousins and uncles and teachers, etc. And the Kauravas. And the entire Bhagavad Gita is a conversation. What is my duty? Another good example are the works of a German philosopher called Immanuel Kant. These are called ontological theories of ethics. What is my duty? There is another set of theories called consequentialism or teleological theories, which basically go into cost-benefit analysis. What kind of action will lead to maximum happiness of maximum number of people? I honestly believe that our Honorable Prime Minister, Mr. Narendra Modi, when he decided to announce demonetization of 500 and 1,000 rupee notes in November 2016, perhaps he was using this teleological theory. In my opinion, he honestly felt that all the black money will come back, or a substantial part of the black money will come back. Because he didn't, I think he was quite naive about the way the economy functions or way systems function. That's my belief. I may be completely wrong. That is, you look into cost benefit, at least in the short run it worked. Because in the UP elections, the ruling party came back with a fantastic margin. Because everybody also believed that the PM's intentions are honest. It is to teach a lesson for the ultra-rich people who have become rich by ill deeds, by ill methods. So, maximum happiness principle. Maximum number of people were happy, abhi inko sikaya. That's the teleological kind of theories of ethics. There's a third set of theories which is called virtue ethics, which deals with character. Now, what happened in ICICI Bank? Mrs. Chanda Kochar, who was certainly had done outstanding work for bringing up the ICICI Bank in a number of ways. but perhaps because of the complete overconfidence, had become immune to systems. Nobody could say no to her or give a contrary opinion. That's a kind of a blemish in character. But irrespective of all this, let me give some good examples of people who have conducted themselves ethically and because of which done outstanding things. An example which immediately comes to my mind is E. Sridharan, the so-called Metro Man, who is still very much alive, doing well. He built the Konkan Railway in Maharashtra after retirement from the railways. He built the Delhi Metro. Now he is settled in some village in Kerala. I don't think in his entire life he has ever compromised. He has done the right thing. And because he has done the right thing, he has also taken decisions for reasons to be recorded in writing. I will give a contract not to L1 but to L2 because, for such and such reason. And nobody will question him because of his moral authority. You can't point a finger at him because he would not have accepted even a cup of tea from somebody without paying for it. Sridharan is a good example. Dr. Homi Bhabha, who built up the Department of Atomic Energy, is another example. Mr. D.V. Kapoor, who built up NTPC. Mr. D.V. Kapoor is also very much around. Is another example. So there are examples. Some of the greatest institution builders in India could do what they did because of ethics. Azim Premji, Narayan Murthy. So it always, I won't say it pays to be ethical. That's a business kind of thing. If you're a good man, you will be ethical. And if you're good and ethical, in whatever profession you are and in whatever business you are, you will do well. Because ethics has professional ethics. Now, bad example. The Satyam scandal would not have taken place without total connivance of PricewaterhouseCoopers. That's an example of how ethical standards were completely compromised. They were obviously in the pockets of Satyam. That's professional ethics. You see lack of professional ethics in a number of professions. You can't condemn the entire profession for that. There are unethical people and ethical people in the same profession. But PwC versus Satyam is an example of that a professional judgment can be purchased. Then there is something called personal ethics, which has to do with the character of a person. Mr. R.K. Pachori, who built up Terry, again a really outstanding professional. Got into issues because of sexual harassment of women. That's a fault of personal ethics. Then there is organizational ethics. Organizational ethics often depends on the personal and professional ethics of the leaders in the organization. If Narayan Murthy has very high ethics, Infosys will have good ethics. I hope I've given a fairly detailed answer to your query.
Yes, sure. So you spoke about Azim Premji and various other people. So what I wanted to ask is that these people were at a stronger position. Now, for someone who's not at a stronger position, so if I wanted to ask directly, it's that during difficult situations, during ethical dilemmas, where I don't know whether to stick to my ethics or not, should I stick to my ethics and compassion or not? And like, how should I stick to my ethics and compassion?
I didn't. You're asking the question if you're at a lower position, what decision you should take, is it?
Yes, sir. Yeah, that's what I'm asking. In ethical dilemmas, should I stick to compassion and ethics, and how should I stick to them? If I'm at a lower position or not, even in normal cases during difficult situations.
Difficult to answer. It all depends on circumstances. It all depends on circumstances. If you feel very strongly that you're not able to do that, the best is to go and tell your boss, I don't think I can do this. Why don't you get it done through somebody else? Or let me have a change of position, transfer me somewhere else. But whether that is possible in the private sector, I don't know. Okay, I think the best is, in my own career, let me give an example where, looking back, I did something which I now don't think was very ethical. I was working as assistant collector in one of my first jobs. And I was in the district of Nanded in Marathwada. And there used to be kind of law and order problems in all these districts. And as the assistant collector, you're also the subdivisional magistrate. So you're in charge of, amongst other things, you're also in charge of law and order. Under various provisions of the Criminal Procedure Code, various powers are given to you and various responsibilities are also given to you. One of the responsibilities is, whenever a death takes place in police custody, the subdivisional magistrate should definitely inquire into it. So a death had occurred in the Nanded police station, and as SDM, I had to inquire into it. Of course, the person who had died was a notorious person. He has been in the various illegal businesses, a bootlegger of sort, had a large number of petty crimes and thefts, etc. against him. He must have been in his 50s. He had been to jail 5-6 times before. So he was a undesirable character. I did my inquiries, and more or less came to the conclusion that yes, the death has occurred in police custody because of third degree employed with the police. But I kept the report with me. I didn't release it for almost 72 hours. In the 72 hours, I was facing a dilemma. The dilemma in my mind was, I'm in charge of law and order. And the police officers who will face consequences because of my report were some of the best police officers in the management of law and order. There was a deputy superintendent of police. There was an inspector of police who were very competent. In fact, when a crowd comes about, the moment they come to the field in the jeep, the crowd will get scared. They had that kind of reputation. So after waiting for 72 hours, I watered down my own report and finally came to the conclusion it cannot be conclusively established that the death took place because of police action. I am now telling this, of course I have told it earlier also to some of my colleagues, etc. But it's one of the first ethical dilemmas. If I were to go completely by the truth, I should have held the police responsible, which would have led to charge sheets and convictions against some of the police officers who were useful to me in the maintenance of law and order. But I have got into similar ethical situations. I have no time to explain it. At higher positions, when I was Secretary to Government, when I have said nothing doing, I won't do this. And even on file written. So you're right in that thing. As an assistant collector in my first job, I also don't want to annoy the local establishment. I have a career to look forward to. But the moment I have reached the pinnacle of my career, perhaps without that first job as assistant collector, I spent 3 sleepless nights. While as secretary, when I said no to my minister in writing on the file, I slept quite peacefully. I did get transferred on the vacation after a few days, but that didn't perturb me. Have I communicated?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Yes, sir. So you actually helped us by giving your own examples also, and that was very profound that you actually shared such a great story. And this is actually this story would actually help a lot of students out here. And sir, also sir, now there are some miscellaneous questions which many registrants had asked. So now this is a question which many of us engineers, budding engineers, and tech people have, which is how can we establish a strong network? Like for an extrovert, it can be easy, but for someone like an introvert, like I am an introvert, there are many people out there who can't establish a strong network. So for people like us, how can we establish a strong network?
Actually, these days it is much easier than during my days. And that is thanks to the internet. You see, now there are professional groups on everything. I suppose all students attending this are aware that there is an open courseware of MIT, the Massachusetts Institute of Technology. Otherwise, please note it down. It is www.ocw, OC all small alphabets, OCW, open courseware, MIT.edu, edu. Now www.ocw.mit.edu is the website on which you can get a very large, almost over 2,500 courses being taught live at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, which for the 7th or 8th year in succession has received the highest ranking as the best institute of engineering and technology in the world. You can listen to all those lectures without paying anything for it. Only the internet time that you spend and the internet data that you use. You won't get a degree, of course, but the same lectures which are actually being taught, the entire course you can do. You can choose the subjects that you want to study. And then, based on that, on every subject, you can get the names of the professors with the details. You can directly correspond with them. You see, the world is networking amongst professionals has become very easy thanks to the internet. You don't have to know anybody. You'll get to know. You can get to know people who have similar interests. So network, and it has nothing to do whether you're an introvert or an extrovert. It's true in the days when internet was not available, particularly marketing people had to be extroverts and needed to attend evening parties and also become an expert on how to hold the drinks without getting drunk. That's no longer required. You can network with people very easy, and depending on your interest and the interest that you exhibit, you can correspond. Even in those days, it used to happen between Hardy and Ramanujam. But at various levels, networking is possible. Networking means what? Communication. And the moment you use the internet, after that, yes. So it's not terribly negative to be an introvert, though it's depending on the professions you join. Various professions require various kinds of qualities. As I said, normally in organizations you work in teams, so it's good to get to know people. I hope I gave some response to your question.
Yes, sure. Sir, one more question was that, of course, diplomacy is a great skill to inculcate, but one question was that does being diplomatic in each and every situation signify a lack of confidence or a lack of guts?
You don't have to, if you have a sufficient reason for taking a position, you can express that reason in a very authentic fashion. And that's not diplomatic. If you can agree to disagree, and if you can express the reasons as to why you have a different view on the subject or a different position on the subject, that won't lead to, you don't have to be very diplomatic about it. Because the other person can easily find out whether your diplomacy is because of lack of knowledge. It will all show in your face. Your facial expression always reveals whether you're confident or not confident. If you have studied a particular matter, you will be confident. If you have not studied a particular matter, you can always ask for time. I think I'll get back to you on this. Give me a day or two. It's a good response.
That was very helpful. So one last question from my side, then I'll ask about the Guess the Unfolder winner's questions. Unfortunately, he had some urgent work, so he had to go in the middle of the meeting. And after that, we'll ask the rapid Q&A by our participants. So last question from my side, sir. How can one maintain positive relations with their senior officials without doing Chamchagiri?
For that, you need luck. What I mean is, if your seniors are themselves good professionally in whatever they are expected to do, there is no need for Chamchagiri. Chamchagiri comes about when the senior has nothing but his position. He feels insecure. So it's not really in your hands. You need luck to get good bosses. If you have mediocre bosses, then bad luck. Then only Chamchagiri works. But that's an unfortunate situation. It comes about because of mediocrity.
So I'll ask the two questions which our winner had posted. He asked that Of course, this is related to this higher officials only. How to deal with our seniors and their ego states and get our work done when our interest doesn't matter or are conflicting. How to get the work done.
You should be able to convince your seniors. So you need good communication skills. Of course, I'm making an assumption that the senior does not have any vested interest. Let me give a blunt example. Suppose it's buying something from a vendor, awarding a contract, and suppose your senior has made up his mind because he has received a kickback. You can do precious little about it. But assuming the decisions are going to be taken in a fair and honest fashion, then you should be able to argue your case. You should be able to communicate well. And if the senior also has no vested interest, he has not pre-decided anything, he will value the arguments and suggestions that he gets. So these are related to ethics and values, which I mentioned.
Yes, sir. So now moving on to the rapid Q&A, which our participants have put on the YouTube link, basically, it's a YouTube chat box. So Pranjali Dere asks how to stay focused on a UPSC examination during my engineering study, and basically how to do my UPSC studies and also sort out my engineering studies as well.
You want me to react to it?
No. And then how can someone manage both UPSC studies and engineering studies? Like how to study, basically, the multitasking thing.
How to study? There are good books by Tony Buzan. Huh? Use Your Head by Tony Buzan. Read that.
Sure, sir. So one more question from Pranjali was that what main thing is to focus during a UPSC studying examination? Like what should I focus mainly on? Being an engineering student.
You see, to be very frank, I don't know the present syllabus of UPSC. It's perhaps very different from the kind of syllabus I had when I wrote the exam. So it all depends on the subject. Without the, I don't even know the scheme of exam that is now. Now I think they have some kind of elimination round, and then I don't even know what subjects you need to teach. You're free to, Harsh, you can give Pranjali my email. She can send me a mail and I'll be able to advise.
Sure, sir. Sir, second question was by some B2RDR and many people that how can I know a person's ego state, like how, which I'm dealing with? How can I?
You won't know. You won't really know. But over a period of time, that is, when you interact, for example, it's your boss, and you interact with him every day, you will know. You will know his normal, behavior patterns, and if you know TA as a subject, you will also know what is his basic life position or his default position. See, let me give an example of that. Since in my job I used to get transferred every couple of years, I once worked with, I was CEO Zilla Parishad at Alibag, and I had a political leader as my boss, the president of the Zilla Parishad. And it's an elected body. So one of the things I realized was that when he is sitting in a meeting where a large number of people are with him, he never liked if you gave a point of view different from his. However, when you have a one-on-one chat with him separately in his chamber, is very attentive. So the moment I learned that, before big meetings, I used to seek time from him. I used to say, you're having this meeting at 4 o'clock. Let us have an earlier meeting at 11 o'clock, just the two of us. So whatever I want, we have the agenda already. So whatever I want to say, I will convince him on one-on-one basis when I'm sitting with him between 11 and 12. And when the main meeting starts at 4 o'clock, I don't even have to open my mouth. Everything that I wanted would have been stated by the president himself. I'm just giving this example. That is, you have to find your own strategies of how to get things done by understanding your boss. Like, here's a boss where he didn't like anybody to disagree with him in the presence of too many people. But otherwise, he's a very good listener when you're one-on-one with him. Got it?
Yeah, sir. That was a very nice example, and like it would surely help everyone. Sir, Omkar asked that if I understand someone's situation but can't empathize with he or she, then what should I do? Like, how can I deal with that thing?
Well, through your facial expression, ensure that the message is got, that you are with him or her in the crisis that he or she is going through.
Sir, one last question, which even I had. What made you interested in philosophy and psychology, sir?
You see, this question was recently asked to me in some other webinar which was there. Perhaps I must repeat that because that is the full truth. As I said, in my college days, my passion was physics. In fact, I was so passionate about physics that there were at least a couple of years when I thought that I have now understood the riddle of life, so to say. So in higher physics, you come to a beautiful theorem which basically says for every symmetry in the world, there is something which is conserved. And conversely, for every conservation law, there is a symmetry in the world. Like momentum is conserved because of symmetry in space. Energy is conserved because of symmetry in time. Something called parity is conserved because of mirror image symmetry. So I went to a professor of physics at Columbia in those exciting days. And there, even in those days, I'm talking of the year 1969, whenever you wanted to meet a professor, all of us had mailboxes, and the professors also had mailboxes. So you just put a chit saying, sir, we'd like to meet you. Can you indicate convenient time? Because in US, etc., the concept of barging into somebody's room is never a custom. You always seek appointment. But the same day, you will invariably get a chit in your mailbox saying, you can meet me with your sandwiches at such and such time. So after fixing appointment, I met my professor and said that I've been fascinated with this theorem of the relationship between symmetry and conservation laws. And I said the question that comes to my mind is, which is more fundamental to understand the universe? Is symmetry more fundamental, or are conservation laws more fundamental? So what this professor did was, he got out of his chair, went to the shelf of books which he had behind those chairs, took out a book, gave it to me, and said, take this, read it. It may take you a week or 2 weeks to read it. And after you finish reading it, irrespective of how much you understood of that book, come back and we will discuss your question. And the book that he had given me, and this being given by a top professor of physics, the book that he had given me was The Critique of Pure Reason by Immanuel Kant, the German philosopher Immanuel Kant. And the name of the book was The Critique of Pure Reason, where Kant asked the question, not whether mathematics is possible, but how the hell mathematics is possible. And not why the hell should nature abide by certain natural laws. And then tries to answer those questions. That's the entire subject matter of the book. That's how I entered philosophy. So I entered philosophy through physics, through this book called The Critique of Pure Reason by Immanuel Kant. And having entered, obviously, my interests widened.
Sure. Thanks for that. Sir, one last question if I can ask. This is something which I had a doubt, and even Vedant asked, which is, sir, what is the difference between manipulation and influencing someone?
Manipulation is a negative overtone. No? That is, manipulation means you want to get something done by hook or by crook, by telling half-truths, untruths. That's all manipulation. Influencing means telling the full truth and convincing the other person.
Okay.
That is when you use narratives which are only part truths and sometimes completely untruths.
Yeah.
The so-called fake news is manipulation.
That was very informative and very deep. Like we had a crazy intense discussion through these 2 hours, and of course, honestly, we couldn't extend more. And so I'll hand over to Sharma, and he will say the word of thanks. Thank you, sir.
Right. Thank you, Harsh. Thank you so much for giving us this chance, this opportunity. And I personally had the privilege of attending Sir's personal lecture that went on for more than 3 hours, and it was quite all had a similar experience during the session. I also would like to apologize for extending the slot for this long. We had decided for a certain time and we extended, so a formal apology. But again, sir, thank you so much for being a part of this. Thank you everyone for watching, and thank you Team Unfolder for making this happen, because this session would not have happened like all of the previous sessions without the team's effort, and who all of them have worked really hard for presenting this to you. So with that being said, I would formally like to conclude the session. And again, thank you everyone for joining us today, and I hope you stick with us for future sessions as well.
Thank you very much. Thank you, everybody.
Thanks a lot, sir. Thank you.
Thank you.
And the feedback form has been shared. You can fill that, and we'll be soon releasing the Get the Unfolder poster for our next speaker as well very soon. Just stay until the time. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. With your permission, I'll leave the meeting.
Sir, thank you. Thanks a lot, sir. Jai Hind, sir.
Thank you.
And thanks.
Thank you, sir.